Warning, this content is for entertainment and educational purposes only. This video is brought to you by First Detachment Nutrition. Battle tested, expert formulated. Use discount code AB10 at checkout for 10% off. All right, folks, Big Paul here with another freshly minted IFBB Pro, Dr. Mike Kalustian. What's up, Mike?
Dude, everything's great. It's been a whopping 6 days as a pro now, and it still doesn't feel real.
That's got to feel cool to have that pro card in your hand and have them call you out, man. That's got to be the coolest feeling ever.
Yeah, it was something since I started competing in 2019 was my first show ever. So it's like 4 years of work and finally getting it. You think about that. That's like, 1,400 days of work, and it finally happened. And it was a tough show. Like
that's actually
700 show. So
that's actually pretty quick, dude. I talked to a guy at Masters Nationals that got his pro card, and I think he told me it was his 13th show, 13th national show, not show, 13th national show. Talk about some persistence. I would have given up.
Yeah, I was watching. Oh man, it was Gary G6, and he did like 14 years of competing to finally go pro, and I'm like, that dude is a legend.
Did he get his pro card?
He did at Masters Universe. He finally did it and then retired the next day. I love it.
Oh, awesome. I knew he had been trying for a while. He seems like a cool guy. I'd like to talk to him sometime. But yeah, I didn't know that he had gotten it. He's big as a house.
I know. What's funny is I didn't compete in 2020, and then I switched federations in 2022. So I really only did like a couple NPC and IFBB, or a couple NPC shows. But what sucked was in 2021, I did my first national show, Junior Nats, and I missed my pro card by one spot.
Oh,
I was like, I was trying to be like the one-hit wonder, and I was like, I barely missed it, and it's haunted me for like 2 years.
Almost nobody. That just like I get young guys that come to me and they have their 2-show plan to get their pro card, and I'm like, bro, that never happens. Like almost never, not unless you're like Ronnie Coleman or Phil Heath or something like that. That almost never happens. Most people grind at this for a long time.
The guy who beat me, it was his 7th or 9th national show. So I'm like, this was your time. I was like, you've been doing this for a lot longer than I have. You deserve it, honestly.
How long you been lifting? How long you been a bodybuilding, just like in a recreational bodybuilder?
Okay, so this is what's kind of crazy too. So I transitioned into bodybuilding at 2019. This is after fully tearing my left pec.
Holy crap, man.
Yeah, I actually don't know another, unless there's one in the last couple years. Like not like a hunter torn pec, like where it's like a muscle belly. Like right now, even for the last 4 years, my pec is literally not attached. I actually don't know any other classic guy to go pro with a fully detached pec. So that's kind of neat, but I got into bodybuilding because I tore my pec off the bone benching 505 4 weeks before a powerlifting meet. And I'm not a huge fan of heavy bench anymore. And due to that, and that was a very scary experience. And people say, what was that like? It sounded like someone, if you could imagine ripping a phone book in half, that's what it sounded like. And then I was like, well, my powerlifting career is over.
I worked as a personal trainer in college, and I spotted a dude one time that ruptured his pec tendon, and it sounded like a shotgun going off, man. It was, I could hear it. And he screamed, and you could see his chest just fill up with blood. It's the craziest thing. Is this the? Let me see here. I think I can see it a little bit in here. Is it this pec over here?
Yes. So I hide it like in all my poses. Like I'll put the torn pec hand behind my head, and then I'll go to the opposite side. So I can basically hide it in every single pose except this front double. But I was like, hey, maybe if I make my biceps big enough, you won't even look at it. So
I see it there. That's I guess I just liked it. That's slick, man. Most people, once you've torn a pec, I can see it actually now.
But if you look at like the side chest and then some of the other poses, you will not be able to tell.
You do a great job of hiding it, man.
Like if you go to I'm trying to think, upper right. Yeah, like you can't see it there. A lot of times you're not gonna know. So a little bit there. That's kind of just something you had to get used to. And I was like, I know I'm kind of going at an uphill battle.
I have a good eye for this stuff, man. And usually I would have spotted it right out of the gate, but I did not see it on you. That's crazy. You've never thought about getting it fixed?
Oh, I did. I thought about it. I literally tore it off the bone, and I was in the middle of the divorce. and I was in the, I remember I had my medical practice, and if I were to take the 3 to 6 months off from work, I would have lost everything in my divorce and lost my practice. So it was either like lose my lifting career or do that. I looked into it 4 years later. They said, if you do this now, it may or may not take, and you can't lift anything or adjust anyone for 6 months. I was like, never mind.
Yeah, that's a never mind. I've had some stuff. I tore my UCL in my elbow. I also tore my labrum.
Oh,
I tore my labrum this past fall, and I just been training around it the best I can.
Yeah, and I will say another thing for all like the viewers out here. I had when I was training for that powerlifting meet, I was 225, and I had done a set of bench presses, and it was a dead stop 405 for 5 on bench. So I'd already completed that set, and I had this coach that was old school, and he was like, "All right, put 100 pounds on and do a negative." In my head, I knew that
sounds such a bad idea.
I literally just did 405 for 5, paused at 225 pounds, and I was fatigued. And he said, "Do a negative." What? And then I tore my pec. I knew in my head going into it, I should never do that. So now, if anyone ever tells me to do something, I'm like, absolutely not. I'm going to go with my gut every time. If it doesn't make sense, I'm not doing it. So don't let someone talk you into doing. If it doesn't sound right, if you get a red flag, run for the hills. They don't know what the hell we're talking about.
I'm telling you, every time I've ever hurt myself, there's been some twinge or some weird premonition beforehand, man. It's always been there. But yeah, it's crazy that you've worked around the pec tear, man. That's insane.
Because I was kind of like, if I can go pro, not only that, but I have an umbilical hernia. And I was like, if I can win with a torn pec, and self-coached, that's crazy. That's like good to me, because like there's a lot of guys fully put together and they can't win. So I was like, self-coached, umbilical hernia, torn pec, still got it. So like all the broken ass people out there, don't give up. You might still be able to do it, if you just
people ask me they're all the time asking me, what do you do about injuries? And I'm like, you just train around them. Yeah,
just figure it out.
Yeah, I'm everything on me is broken. I'm almost 50 years old, man. I got a lot of miles on this motor.
Yet you're still progressing too. So what's that say?
Well, I had to reinvent my training. You talking about the bench press thing, like I had completely dropped all. I used to be like a power body. I would say a power builder. I lifted more like a power lifter than I did a bodybuilder when I was younger. DC Dorian Yates style training. I don't, Dante Trudell used to train me, but I had to kind of rethink things as I got older because in my 40s, I just couldn't sustain that style of heavy lifting with compound movements. And I gravitated towards Mike Israel's stuff, the Renaissance periodization stuff.
His stuff is so good.
Yeah, and that's what I've been using for the last 3 years, and I've progressed on that. And for the most part, I haven't really been hurt other than the labrum tear, and that was me being a dumbass, and I decided I was going to do some incline benches, and I was showing off for some people, and I felt it pop.
Really?
I thought I tore my pec at first, but it was the labrum. So I'm like, well, that's not cosmetic.
Yeah, Bumstead shoulder injury, you can't tell. But it's funny you mention that, because when I first started training, I was 15 years old. My dad had owned a bunch of Nautilus gyms back in the day and went and got into gym promotions. I like the Nautilus stuff, honestly. And he was a huge Dorian Yates fan. So I only trained 3 days a week, push-pull legs. Every set was maximum failure. So I was used to training really heavy, like 6 to 8 reps, super hard. And I feel like you can get away with it while you're young. But I tried to do that as long as I could. And this was actually the year I switched my entire training program. And I told myself, no more training to failure.
Yeah, I don't train to failure at all.
No, and because what's funny is you mentioned it on your podcast one time. You're like, is it really worth it? And I said, I always because I did it for 15 years. I'm like, oh, if it worked then, it works now. No, I wish I wouldn't have actually, because this is the first year I would never go above 1 rep in reserve. So I did 0 failure training all year, ended up looking my best. I did the entire 18-week prep with 0 deloads and 0 injuries.
Yep.
I'm like, why didn't I do this a long time ago? I just focused on technique and volume.
Yep.
And I got in the best shape of my life. I love Dorian Yates. I still love him. He's a freaking beast. And I learned a lot from it. but I don't think it works as well. For at least it didn't for me. Due to
for most people, no.
Dry. I mean, like I felt like shit all the time.
Your elbows hurt, your shoulders hurt, everything hurts. You can't train hard when you're beat up all the time.
You tear your pec, you get a hernia. Yeah. So I actually switched. I will never go back. I will never. Sometimes I'll do 2 reps in reserve. I don't care. But
so I had a hard time psychologically with it at first because I had been programmed myself to be constantly beating the logbook. And I've had the best progress of my life not doing that anymore. Now, with that said, I still progress. I'm progressing volume. I progress, things like I'll do a periodized volume style training where I add more volume, or I'll add more weight within the constraints of, what the program is. But I'm not training to failure anymore, or doing forced reps or, any of that. I don't do anything like intensifiers, no drop sets, no forced reps, no rest pause, none of that anymore.
When you mentioned that, I used to do a lot of drop sets, didn't do any of them. I mean, like something like a light bicep curl, like a cable curl, I will like squeeze the shit.
Yeah, that's different. Yeah, that's different.
There's no risk for injury. So it really wasn't that scary. It's funny too. I was like, okay, what if I was like, when people say like beating the logbook, I'm like, okay, let's say I'm doing hack squats and I got 4 plates on each side and I got 10 reps and I left 2 in reserve. And then 6 months later, I did 12 reps and I still had 2 reps in reserve. That's still progress. So
yeah, it's still progress. Yeah, you're still progressing.
It's the same exact thing. It just doesn't mean I'm shooting my wad on every set. So
when you think about it too, like I tell people, if you think about it objectively, like with powerlifters almost never train to failure.
The only time they train to failure, the only time they do is meet day.
Yeah. Yeah.
They almost like even, I'm trying to think. I don't think they ever go above like 90%.
No.
My office manager is actually a professional powerlifter. I just hired her this month. We talk about it all the time. And the worst thing you could do is train to failure consistently as a powerlifter, because your CNS will just get wrecked and then you're going to perform horribly.
Yeah. Like powerlifters have figured this out 30 years ago, and then bodybuilders are still beating themselves up. Like it's like the most nonsensical training you see is with powerlifters. Like bodybuilders have it figured out. Football players, they know specifically how to train for their sport, et cetera. It's just like bodybuilders. It's like I get guys all the time. They can't figure out if they're a powerlifter, or bodybuilder, or CrossFitter or whatever. And I try to get them to reframe how they think about training.
Yeah. And what's funny is too, is also thinking back to cardio too. When everyone would ask me, like, what cardio did you do for your prep? You were really conditioned. And you hear so many people saying hit cardio, hit cardio, hit cardio. I always noticed when I did a lot of hit cardio, my legs would not look as good. And it a lot of fatigue. So everyone goes, you must be doing a lot of hit cardio. You must be on the stairs. I did 0 high intensity cardio. No one believes me. I was like, I literally only did steps. So I would, because like my legs are my strong point. If I ruin those, that's like my ace in the hole. There's no way I'm going to perform well without keeping my legs.
Yeah, you came to the same conclusion I did. Like when I do the stair melt, it melts my legs. My legs shrivel up.
Yeah, and that's, to me, I'm like, why? And also too, if you're doing high intensity, you are having to focus extremely hard, which takes mental power. At the end of prep, you don't have a lot of mental power. So I was trying to save that for training. I was like, if I just walk, I'm chilling. I'm relaxed. I can listen to an anabolic bodybuilding podcast as I do. And I'm like, dude, this takes like no effort. And all I did was, when I started my prep, I would get like 8,000 steps. Like I'm going to try to give out like exact numbers too. In the off season, I was getting like 8,000, maybe 10,000 steps per day in the building season. As soon as I started prep, I went up to 12,000. I ran that for the first month. Then I would go up to 14,000, then 16,000. And I did get all the way up to 20K steps a day for the last like 6 weeks of prep, which does sound like a shit ton, but I was trying to just slowly taper my cardio up to just increase the calorie deficit at the end. And I did absolutely 0 step mill or anything like that. So, and it really wasn't that hard, honestly.
Yeah, and that's what I do for my coaching clients. I'll just have them walk, and I'll have them taper it up as we go. Last year, I think I capped out at 30 minutes walking, and I was plenty lean on stage. I didn't You know, I think when I got my DEXA scan done, it was like 4.5% at the ends. So like
how little cardio you have to do and how much you can still eat and get shredded.
Yeah, it's a
curse,
I don't know, it's a blessing and a curse, man, because it's like I like this off season, like I literally hit my limit of how much food I could eat. I couldn't eat anymore. Like Justin's like, it was making me sick. It was causing me stomach problems, but I had to be careful and prep because I'll shrivel up too. So I'm naturally a skinny guy. You know, I was like 170 pounds when I graduated college. So
really,
yeah, I've always been kind of a skinny guy. So I have a smaller frame, but it just how it goes. But yeah, that's interesting. You know, so you sort of came to the same conclusion that I did, man. And it's something that you have to sort of figure out. I do think like when you're young, you do need to build a base of strength up, and then you sort of transition into this style of training. You know, so going to failure and beyond when you're benching 135 pounds is not that risky, right?
Yeah.
And also when you're younger, you're more pliable than you are as you get older. I mean, like I think about it now, like I would go out and play backyard tackle football games when I was in my 20s. If I did that now, I'd be a cripple in the emergency room. Why would I do that now? Why would you train like you did when you're in your 20s? I just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, it seems pretty dumb on my end too. And what I'll do is I'll listen to multiple. I don't listen to a lot of people when it comes to bodybuilding. I think 99% of coaches are pretty dumb. Just when I hear like certain things, and there's like a select like 5 or 6 I listen to, and they'll say, "Hey, do you really need to do HIIT cardio?" And I'm like, really? There's no reason you would have to. And so I was like, well, let me try it. You know, I'll just hear things and apply it. And I do steal a lot of things from your podcast. And usually they're all pretty applicable and they all make sense. Like to me, if you can give me the reason why, and it sounds better than my current reason, I will 100% do it.
Yeah, it's a simple question. I heard like Dr. Mike Israetel talking about it. Like he was talking about guys training to failure, and he's like, I asked them why, and they go, well, bro, it's intensity, and he's like, but they can't give you a reason.
Yeah, I think it is good to train to failure to know what it is.
Yeah, to know where that is.
Failure, like why not? And then it may make you may just increase your pain threshold a little bit.
Right.
But once in a while, hit it hard. But nowadays, I'm like, no, I actually got way better results.
Yeah.
And what's weird is my body actually looked different. And
I think you get fuller.
Yeah. And like the cardio part was so simple for me. Like I don't have a lot of good things to add to that on prep, but the training, when I kind of would switch and I was like, okay, trying to transition from powerlifting. Because when I did my first show in 2019, I looked like a powerlifter that tried to bodybuild. I was like, I feel like I was built like a freaking refrigerator. You know what I mean? It just wasn't pretty. And I had to start pulling really heavy squats and deadlifts out of my program. And when I say like shrink your waist, I don't think it's waist like side to side. I almost think it's like the A to P thickness, like front and back. Like my low back was so thick and core. It made me look not very aesthetic on stage.
Yeah.
So I had to switch that. And then like back training, I'd know to like, I'll do 2 exercises for like Terry's minor, 2 for the middle traps, 2 for the lats. So I'm like trying to be super specific with each muscle group. And then even with shoulders, 2 for the anterior delt, 2 for the side delt, 2 for the rear delt. You see so many guys with no rear delts. I'm like, where's your rear delts at? You can tell all you do is like dumbbell press.
Yeah, they don't train them.
No, it's like, of course, a muscle. Like even with me, with my calves, I never trained them as a powerlifter. I'm like, why do my calves suck? Well, fuck, I never train them. Like, would you be shocked if you're a person in America and you go, I don't have a job. You go, why am I poor? Because you don't fucking work. Like, obviously you're going to be poor, you know? It's like, why are you shocked? It's like, I actually started training my calves. I'm like, whoa, they grew like 3 inches in 3 years. I was like, wow, they're like normal size now. I was like, no shit, because I didn't train them. You know, I just was training like an idiot, like just a power lifter.
Yeah.
So,
it's funny when you dissect people's training and they have lack of development in an area, you can almost directly correspond it to the amount of volume they attribute to that muscle group.
Yeah. And like, and I used to do calves after doing like quads. I would do like 3 sets and be like, oh, I'm tired. See you later. You know, it's like, even with that, I'll do like, everyone always asks me about my quad training because my legs are huge. My quad training is so simple. I do 1 squat variation, almost always a hack squat now.
That's what I do.
Squat. Exactly. So what's funny is, you know, I'm doing a set of hack squats and I'll go pretty hard. they're like burning when I'm done. So I go, hey, my quads are on fire. They're going to be on fire for the next 10 minutes. Let me go bang out 5 or 6 sets of calves. So then I'm doing calves. Within 10, 15 minutes of doing calves, my calves are on fire, but my quads feel good. So I'm like, all right, time to go to a pressing motion. So I'll do like a leg press or a hip press. So there's some kind of pressing motion. Now, I'm done with that. My quads are burning again, but my calves are fine. So I go do calves. And then
that makes sense. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm like, wow, my quads were burning, but now I can do calves for 15 minutes. Oh, my quads are recovered. So now I finish with extensions and I'm done. That's literally all I do.
Yeah, so you gave me a new idea today. That's a good one. My quad training is even more simple than that. I just usually I start off with leg extensions. I'll do the hacks, and then maybe I'll finish off with like some sissy squats or split squats or something like that. Yeah, but I don't do any barbell squats anymore at all.
No, I did them twice this year, and the second time I did them, I injured my SI joint. So I was like, oh, that's great. It really depends on your levers too. It was, for me, squatting, when I was a little fatter, it was a lot easier to squat heavy weight, because the most I ever squatted, it was like just with knee sleeves and a belt. I did 565, and it was like RPE 9, but I was also like fatter. Like my trunk was very thick, and I feel like it gave me the support. Now that my waist isn't big, my squat biomechanics are very off. So I'm like, I might as well just bang out a bunch on hack squats and leave it at that.
I feel like they aren't tall guy friendly either. It's always the short dudes that get big quads from doing squats.
Every time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I switched up my hamstring training. I used to never train my adductors and abductors. So I'll actually warm up with adductors and abductors, do those first, because like I think they're boring. So I was like, let me do those while I'm kind of getting my mind right. And then I'll go do either a lying or a seated leg curl to kind of like prime the hammies, go pretty hard. And I go, oh, my hamstrings are burning. Now I'm going to go do calves. And I do calves again. Then I'll go do like an RDL, then calves, then hamstrings again. So that's actually how I improve my calves, because if you wait to the end of your session to do calves, I feel like your CNS is shot and you kind of do a crappy job. So I was like, hey, let me just put these and just give myself a little break to put it in the meat and potatoes. And my calves got big. So I was like, wow, I thought I was just like genetically. But my thing is too, like I remember my girlfriend saying she has like genetically massive calves. It's like retarded. The whole calf genetic thing. If I have the genetic ability to get 30-inch quads, like obviously I have decent genetics to build muscle, or I wouldn't have such big legs. Do those genetics not apply to my calves too? Or am I just not training them? Lo and behold, I wasn't training them. So
it's funny how that works, isn't it?
Yeah, I wasn't putting in the work. So of course they look like crap.
Yeah, it was with the adductor thing. That's another thing. That was an old trick I learned from Dante Trudel back in the day. Like he talked about specifically training adductors. I have a quad focused day, and then I'll do a B leg workout where it's specifically hamstrings and adductors. That's what hamstring, adductors, and glutes. Yeah,
that's the same thing I do. Because if I try to do quads, calves, glutes, and hams on one day, I'll be there for 3 hours.
Yeah.
And like too, why if we're talking about like upper halves of a body, you have an upper half and a lower half. Why would I train the upper half 4 times and the lower half once?
Right.
It doesn't seem proportional. Like it doesn't make sense. Like you wouldn't do upper body once and then lower body 4 times. Like why would you do the inverse of that? I'm like, that makes no sense. And does that has tiny ass legs. I'm like, oh geez.
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff is just dogma that's been established, and nobody's ever sat back and thought about, as you said earlier, why? Ask that simple question, why?
If you can give me a good why, I will try it too. But a lot of times if you don't have a why, you're just regurgitating something someone else.
Yeah, just
like
some other.
Sodium's bad for you. Like every doctor said for 20 years. I'm like, really? You'd be dead without it, because it doesn't make sense,
Yeah, it makes zero sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just everybody hears something that some bro regurgitated from, the bro they heard it from before, and they never stop to ask, why do you need to do this?
Who told you this? I want to know the source now. Who said this?
It's just nobody ever takes the time to sit and think about this stuff. It's just like, like the nutrition stuff too. Like the whole. I do carb cycling. I don't know how you do your diets, but like. Like the whole carbs make you fat thing too. It drives me nuts.
That I never understood that too, because if you break it down to high school level nutrition, you think of protein is I guess the first fundamental is calories are a measure of energy. The more calories you eat, the more weight you gain. If you're breaking it down and say you got 3 to choose from, like not counting ethanol, which is 7 grams or 7 calories per gram, like get rid of that. You have protein, which is 4 calories per gram. You have carbs, which is 4 calories per gram. And you had fat, which is 9 calories per gram. Like if I grabbed like a 10-year-old off the street and said, which one would you worry about the most? They'd probably say fat. Yet somehow we've convinced, like if you have one that's 4 and then 9, fats have 225% more calories. Why would we not focus on that the most, like right off the bat?
Yeah, that's very, just a very basic level of thinking, which most escapes most people. And then too, like I ask people, I'm like, what are muscles burning when you're lifting? And not to mention, not only are they burning glucose, they have a gas tank built into them, glycogen stores for storing glucose. Why wouldn't you want to capitalize on maximizing glucose storage and having the fuel that the muscles actually run off of?
Yeah, you pull it right out of your storage unit. It's like, I think there's like, I don't remember who said it, but they're like, yes, my car runs on gasoline. That's the easiest. It's very easy to get. It's built to run on that. He's like, can I run it on corn? Probably, but it's a lot harder. So it's kind of like, why would I run it on keto? I did keto one time. So I was in medical school. It's probably like 10 years ago. This is when the keto craze happened. I was like, oh, this is going to be easy. So I would eat I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be in the best shape of my life. I would eat like 8 eggs with cheese in the morning for breakfast. I remember going to school with a peanut butter thing of Jif, like the big one from Costco. And I'm like, I eat like half one. I'm like, I'm going to be in such good shape. I remember I lost like 9 pounds of body weight, but I gained like 5 pounds of body fat in like 3 weeks. Yeah. I said, I look like the fucking Pillsbury Doughboy now. I was like, that was the last time I was like, I look like my arms shrunk in my stomach. I was like, I look like a pillow with arms. What the fuck happened to my physique? I said, I will never do. I was like really thinking about it. I'm like, well, I tried it. I look like absolute garbage. I will never do that again. So I'm not saying like I'm anti because it didn't work for me, but just because I got fat during that time. But I was like, I don't think it really works that well for anybody. Like I would never suggest it. There's a much easier, better way.
Yeah. I mean, I look at it as a tool in the toolbox. I mean, there are some situations, like maybe if I had somebody that was severely obese and insulin resistant, it might be a tool you could use to maybe get some weight off and improve insulin sensitivity, possibly. But I mean, the thing, like with PED using bodybuilders, I see who are trying to maximize looking full. Why wouldn't you want to use carbohydrates to fill your muscles out with glycogen? And also, like anybody I see that does a high fat diet with PEDs are already skewing your lipids to begin with, and then they end up, their lipid profile looks like crap when they get blood work done. And we all know the #1 risk to PED users is cardiovascular events and you're protecting your cardiovascular health. So why would you not want to minimize that risk as well? So it's like two things.
Yeah, actually, not only that, but not bodybuilders. I think like performance athletes in general should probably run like the high carb model, even for performance stuff. I think if I did have someone that was more super overweight, diabetic, insulin resistant, I probably wouldn't have them on. I would probably put them on moderate fat and maybe like moderate to low. I wouldn't put them on like high fat, but I would say like maybe moderate fats. Yeah, and moderate to low carbohydrates. And as they start getting more insulin sensitive, they would slowly taper up the carbs and lower the fats.
Yeah, that's exactly what I do.
When you're at that point, I feel like it's probably like just get in a calorie deficit, But
I usually with
having a little lower carbs in the beginning of that would be beneficial.
That's exactly how I structure it. What I'll do is I'll carb backload with them. Like I'll have them eat all their carbs post-workout. And then we'll slowly start introducing carbs and pulling fats out. And the fats that I put in, I try to keep saturated fats low and primarily lean into EFAs for their fat sources. So that's typically how I do it.
Yeah. So getting into nutrition, I think with this prep, I did my nutrition pretty different because I did an 18-week diet and I took a different strategy this time. Usually I don't know why I would do this, but I was always afraid of losing muscle and getting small. So I would diet like super freaking slow and then I'd be behind every time for prep. And I'm like, all right, time to step on the gas and do something extreme at the end, which never worked out. So I was like, let me start out the gate faster. And I actually ran more, like I'm trying to think back on my macros. I started off prep at about 300 grams of protein. I did 350 grams of carbs, and I was at 80 fat. And I was like, let me start this and just see what happens. Because it put me, I mean, it was roughly that. I remember in my off-season, I was eating like 4,500 calories at peak build. I was 246. Probably, I would say around 13-ish, give or take 14% body fat. I know everyone says they're 10. They're definitely not. Like, I'm not saying that. Like, I was like, I think I posted a before and after of like 246.
Yeah, I'll pull it up.
Like, you see that picture? It was in like blue trunks. It was like 107 days of work or whatever. I was definitely like at best case scenario, like 14, 15. Yeah. Like on the left, no abs hardly. I had like one indentation. Wasn't pretty. So I was like, okay, let me just start out the gate. So the first month, I remember there was like a month I had before starting prep. I was like, let me just go to like 4,000 calories base. And then I would just run TRT. And well, my TRT, I actually have it. I guess I'll just segue into this right now. I actually was thinking of like, when it comes to medicine, how do they usually do the dosing? It usually goes by, well, sex for one and body weight for the other. I was like, huh. I was like, if I had a client, a patient of mine come in, and it was a 150-pound guy, and then I just had a guy come in the other day, and he asked me about it. He's an ex-NFL football player, defensive lineman, played for the Patriots, Super Bowl champion. He's like 300 pounds. I was like, why would I put him on the same dosage as the other guy? Does everyone just get 200?
Yeah.
I was like, why don't I just say like do 1 milligram per pound of body weight?
That's what I do.
Okay, so I actually didn't even know that. So I was okay. I was 246. I was like, I'll just do 1 ml of Test 250 a week. Perfect. And I went down to 4,000 calories. And I ended up losing like in a month like 5 pounds. You know, some of that was probably water retention, glycogen, things like that. So then I was 246, and I said, okay, I'm going to start my calories. I was at 4,000, and I was getting like 8K steps a day. I'm going to go up to 10K steps a day, and I dropped it all the way down to like 3,300. And I was losing about 2 pounds a week. So I was like, this is great. So I actually wanted to start out my diet a little more aggressive. And I said, well, rather than decreasing my food right away, why don't I just try to just add a little more cardio? So I'd go up to 12K steps. And then did that. I would lose a couple more pounds. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to go straight down to 3,000 calories. I'm not going to be afraid to lower my food this time. So about every month, I remember every 2 weeks-ish, I would drop 100 to 200 calories, usually just from either 10 grams of fat. I would drop like 10 grams of fat and 25 grams of carbs each time. Because my fats were at 80, I knew they needed to be lower. That's like the easiest thing for me to pull. So I would start at 3,200 calories, and then I would go down to like 3,000 and then 28. I was at 2,800 calories by the time I got to 8 weeks out. I had this weird idea. I was like, what if at this point I'm at 2,800 and I did not do any high, any low? I would do the same exact diet, no cheat meals the whole entire time. Like just a base. This is my deficit. If I do the same thing every day, if I'm in a 500 calorie deficit today, I'll be in one tomorrow, so on and so forth. I was losing like on average 1.5 to 2 pounds a week. So it was a perfect linear. I mean, it was so linear, it was ridiculous. So it was nice. No ups and downs, super linear. When I started the 18-week diet, I was like, what am I going to do for my cycle? I was like, let me keep it super simple. I'm going to do 500 tests, split up into 2 shots. I think I did like Wednesday, Saturday with my leg day. And then I would do 400 Primobolan. So 1 ml of Primobolan, 200, 1 ml of test, 250. So I was like, starting stack is 500 tests, 400 Primo. And they go, well, why is that all you took? Well, because you're so heavy, I wasn't doing a lot of cardio. My food was still pretty high. I don't think I need a lot because I'm not counteracting a lot of atrophy at that point.
Yeah.
So what am I going to blast to the roof for off the bat when I don't need it? And then growth hormone wise, I actually paid for a consult with Dr. Dean Smith, and he convinced me to actually just do a bedtime dosage. I was like, okay, I'll try that. So I would just do 4 IUs of generic, tested generic before bed. And honestly, my recovery was phenomenal. So I was like, I didn't feel sore. I didn't feel beat up. So I was like, why do I need any more than that? I really didn't feel like I had to, because I was like, now if I go full blast out the gate, I'm not going to have a new lever to pull from later. So then once I got down to below 3,000 calories, I said, okay, let me bump it up a little bit. So I would do 750 test and 600 Primobolan. So I just added 1 milliliter of each per week. So I would do like 3 shots per week, 250 test, 200 Primobolan per shot. Because I was like, okay, I'm a little deeper into a deficit. I've lost like 12, 15 pounds. My recovery is lagging a little bit. Then I would do that to prop me up a little bit. And then during that same time, this was about 6 weeks in. So I did 5 weeks on 500, 6 weeks on 500 tests, 400 Primo, 4 IUs of growth. And then after that 6 weeks was up, I did 750 test, 600 Primo, and then I added 2 IUs of growth hormone in the morning before I did my cardio. So I was like, nice. I just increased each of it. I was at 33%.
Yep.
So I was like, perfect. And it was I had a little more fatigue because I was leaner, and I just had a little more PEDs. So it bounced out. I felt great. And I added 500 milligrams of metformin before bed, dinner time, and then breakfast too, which I do love because when I was a little heavier, I feel like my insulin sensitivity wasn't great, but it also really helps with GI tract, at least for me. I noticed there's some studies like showing it changing your microbiome. I never had problems going to the bathroom, even on like contest prep day. I know it's like TMI, but people ask. I remember the day I competed, I think I shot like 6, 7 times that day. Like no joke, like just kept it going. I think like metformin really helped with that.
Yeah, I ran metformin my entire prep the last time.
I remember you saying it helps with appetite suppression, and I noticed the same exact thing.
Yeah. This year I haven't run it yet. I may save it for later. But you talking about tapering up, it's funny. That's the same way I do stuff, although I'm running a little bit more this year. I'm bigger, but yeah, I remember John Meadows talking about it, and he talked about it's like playing poker. You want to save the cards save your aces for when you need them.
Yeah, and I remember you showing your graph, and I'm like, really, when your body fat is high, your cardio is low, and your food is pretty high, what do you need more for? It doesn't make sense. Like, use it when you need it.
Yeah, and I remind people on contest prep, your job is to lose fat and not lose muscle. That's really it. You're not going to be gaining anything tissue. I mean, very few people are actually going to be, in a state of hypertrophy. And like Kevin Levrone is the only person I can think of that was ever able to do it.
I knew you were going to say that too. But also, what's funny is my dad actually, he had a gym, I'm pretty sure, that failed in New York. And my dad was sent in to try to save it. And he said, first off, Kevin Levrone, it's kind of funny. He was like, Kevin Levrone is so lazy. He has to have someone train him. Cook all his meals for him. He said, and I think like he had that response because I think he would go so polar opposite, like not lift, not follow a food plan, eat like 2 meals a day and just do whatever. And then he would get back on full blast cycle, full blast training. And someone was like, literally, he had a chef like making all of his meals for him and just feeding him. I think like that's how you get like a crazy rebound like that. Like, I mean, he was different, I mean,
he would rebound in the shows. He's a local guy. He's from this area, the DC, Baltimore area. But I remember seeing him around sometimes in the off season, and he would be like 200 pounds skinny fat.
Yeah,
like what?
Like I feel like you can definitely set yourself up for a good rebound. Like his was like on another level, but I mean, for most people, you're not, because if your food is super high in your off season, your sleep is high, your cardio is low, and your PEDs are moderate, you're probably you're building the maximum muscle you can. You're not going to go into a deficit and do more cardio and be like, yeah, I'm going to just gain a bunch of muscle again. If you were going to gain a bunch of muscle, you've already done it in your building season.
Yeah.
I would say just maintain as much as you can and just focus on the fat loss. Like,
yeah.
I mean, like you said, 1 in a million are going to be able to make that transfer. And that's if they had a terrible off season.
Yeah, and that's what I tell my guys that I work with. I mean, like guys are all the time thinking, like, can I grow and going into a cut or a contest prep? I'm like, just don't, like, break it out in phases, man. It's going to be the most productive way of getting the most out of your year. I think of it this way as, contest prep or your fat loss phase. Like I said, your job is to lose fat, not lose muscle. And then, in your off season, then it's not to get super fat and to put on as much muscle as you can while doing that. And the rebound, that's sort of, 6-week piece of magic that you only get once a year. So, but
speaking of which, I actually waited till right now to ask you. I remember you mentioning as soon as you got done with your show, you did not cut everything out. I actually was like, I'm going to ask him about this. But I was thinking for me personally, like, because I just finished, I was like, I think there actually would be a decent benefit just to staying on, even instead of just going straight back to my 250 test, like stay on 500 for 5 weeks and see what happens. And maybe don't drop all the metabolic agents too. Maybe like cut them down in half or a third. And that's actually what I did. And I was like, oh, I actually feel like I mean, my face is, I still need to gain some fat back because my face just looks kind of skinny and whatever, but I actually feel incredibly good. 5 or 6 pounds since competing, because I didn't eat like an asshole this time for once, which is nice. And going straight up to the 500 test and keeping it there, even if it's manual, keep it there for 5 or 6 weeks, I think that's actually the way to go. And I think a lot of these pros are like, I'm cruising or I'm off, and they're these huge guys. I think they're full of shit. Yeah, I think a lot of them will cruise, like no joke, on like a gear a week.
Or they just don't come off. They don't ever come off.
That's what I'm saying. Like I actually am finding proof as I'm getting like deeper into this. I'm finding friends and coaches and getting screenshots. And I'm like, I freaking knew it. You know what I mean? So I'm like, maybe if I just stay at like 500 for 6 weeks, that would probably be the better instead of like, I should just come off. I mean, horrible idea.
Yeah, I mean, you're creating a hormonal crash, man. I mean, you think about it, like you're going to have a nasty estrogen rebound. Your hunger hormones and metabolism. I mean, everything's just going to be out of whack at the same time. It's just a recipe to get fat. And my thought process is, and talking about it with Justin Harris is you're the most anabolic that you're going to be coming out of a show. Your insulin sensitivity is going to be at an all-time high. Your gastric emptying is going to be at an all-time high. The appetite, I mean, everything is going to be just primed for growth. Why not take advantage of that? You don't have to run your full, your full off-season stack or your full contest prep. You just half, or what you were doing, and then eat good, clean food. I mean, like Justin talks about it, he would rather have people eating a fair amount of good, clean food than binging. Most people are either going to binge or they're just not going to follow the diet post-show. And so let's just keep them full on good food and use that as an opportunity to grow for like 6 or 8 weeks. And you slowly taper down your fat burners and your PEDs into, a cruise in 6 or 8 weeks, and then prepare yourself for your off season.
Well, this is a great segue then. So that being said, I was sitting there last night and I was like, man, I wonder if I should be taking more then. Because like 500 isn't even close to what you would use in like an off season, should it be closer to 1,000 and then you slowly taper down from there?
You don't need a ton. I mean, I think last year, that year that I did the huge rebound where I had like the 50
NPP, right?
Yeah. Test and NPP is what I ran. I ran 500 tests and 150 milligrams of NPP. That was it.
Yeah, so that's why I was like, 500 seemed like a good bit. Like I feel like I could do it, maybe more. But
although I think now I probably would run Primo because of I probably had a pretty nasty estrogen rebound because the Primo is going to mop up some of the estradiol a little bit. So
it probably didn't get you off the bat though, because your estrogen was probably tanked. Because in my head I'm like, I would rather just run a good bit of test to get my estradiol back up. And then I guess you could probably run, what if you ran like 500 tests for, let's say, 3 weeks? Your estradiol is in a good place, and say, okay, now I'm going to add in 300 milligrams of masteron too, or something like that. But as soon as I did that, I remember that shot, like my estrogen, I could tell was quite a bit low. I could tell just getting my estrogen up, my mental cognition was much better and getting a little calories in. It's funny.
Sex drive comes back.
Quick, and speaking of which, too, the tapering off the metabolic agents, what's kind of neat is this time I did not come off everything, and I kept in 50 micrograms of T3 and 40 Clen, and I would still get up because that would make me like I was kind of in the habit of getting up, taking that. I would fast for 45 minutes to an hour, and I'd walk my dog. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm taking this. I can't go downstairs and plow a bunch of oatmeal or something. Let's go take my dog for a walk, which makes me comply to my cardio. And I'm like, well, if I'm getting up doing my cardio, well, I feel like I'm on prep. I would still eat the same breakfast as I did on prep. And I think that's why I've only gained like 5 pounds. And like, if someone's like, you got to get on stage tomorrow, like I could do it. Like, it was just because I did not cut everything out. And I think that I also did steal from you. And I think that was the way to go. And then you could slowly taper down the thyroid and Clen or whatever. But then I'm listening to someone mention with Chase, and they were like, I was like, what would happen if, let's say hypothetically, someone goes, you know what, I'm going to keep my 50 micrograms of T3 in the whole time. Would it make it so it's almost impossible to get fat in your off season in a way, or just very difficult? Is it worth it to get it for the, like for me, if someone were to argue that, I would say, why? And they would go, well, maybe if I stay leaner in my off season, I'll have better insulin sensitivity and I'll have better hunger. I'm like, okay, that's a good reason. I could, maybe argue, but sometimes I'm like, I don't know if running 50 micrograms of T3 year round is a great idea, although I don't have any side effects. My heart rate's 51 right now, resting, 51 to 54. But I'm like, is that too much of a dose to be catabolic, or is it, it wasn't like that in prep, but.
Well, I know there are some guys that run T3 year round because I believe HGH will suppress T3 in some people. So it actually, keeps things working better. I have seen that. I don't run it year round. I never have. But my thyroid tends to be on the high side.
So is mine. So I'm like, maybe it's not worth it.
Yeah. And, so I think it's a case by case. You let your blood panels dictate that. I'll see guys where TSH and stuff starts to get high, which is an indication that you're not converting T4 to T3. So that and then you at least from what I understand, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that would be a situation where you would want to probably add some T4 or something in the off season.
Yeah, and what's weird too is I thought to myself, I'm like, if I did do that hypothetically, am I just, because I got a little fucking fluffy in my off season. Am I doing that to try to find the easy way out? Or should I just tighten up my diet in my building season and be more disciplined, and maybe I wouldn't have gotten as fat in the first place, or do both? I don't know. Because I'm kind of like an 80-20 in my building season, which I should probably be more of a 90-10. Because I shouldn't complain about body composition if 20% of my food is not
right.
I'm like, maybe if I were just a little more disciplined, which I'm going to have to be now this year, but.
Yeah, and that's what I found is treating your off season like a contest prep, that you'll do a lot better.
Oh yeah.
That year that I had the great progress, I pretty much was 100% with the diet all off season. I only deviated a couple times. I've been playing around too with running higher dose growth hormone recently, and I have noticed that I started losing weight. I did change nothing with my diet, and I started losing weight when I cranked up the growth hormone. My body started recomping. It was really wild, really weird, man.
Was that lipolytic?
It has to be, right?
Because if you're saying you recomp, that means you gain muscle and lose fat, which means you wouldn't have a net weight loss.
No. Well, I should say that I lost weight. Yeah, correct. You're correct about that.
That lipolytic, which that could argue then maybe you would say like, hey, you could increase your growth hormone levels, monitor your T3 and T4 levels, go as high as you can without needing T3 or 4. Or I know Chase does 25 micrograms T3, 100 T4 because it will impact thyroid levels.
Yeah.
What's weird is a lot of people are like, oh, the hype from growth hormone being lipolytic is overrated. But it's about 50-50 from when I hear anecdotal evidence-wise. Because then I hear this and I'm like, well, I guess it depends what's high. We're talking 10 IUs, 5 IUs.
I ran 10 this year. I pushed up to I tried 15 for a while, and I couldn't stay awake at my desk at 115. But 15 was too much. Chase was trying to convince me to do the 15, but that didn't work. Yeah, I'll show you. So this was end of last off season, and then end of this off season. I weighed exactly the same in these two pictures.
It's almost funny too, because look at the size of your lats and the leg definition.
Yeah.
What's funny is you and Chase are the ones I've never used GH in my off season. I always shied away from it because I was like, I don't want to be insulin resistant. And I would only use it I've only used it twice in my life for prep, because I was like, I'm in a calorie deficit. It's not going to matter. But now I'm like, well, maybe it is worth, even if it was 5 IUs a night, to try it, because I have to gain so much weight for this off season to compete as well. It might be the lever I need to pull.
Well, I know a lot of the pros are running way more than that.
Yeah. And I'm like, on prep, I guess I'll segue back into my prep story. But it was about 10 weeks out of prep. I was running my 750 test, 600 Primo, 6 IUs of growth hormone. And I don't use orals in my off season. My biggest off season,
I don't either.
All I did was 500 tests, 400 Primo, 300 MPP. And I was like, I wasn't trying to push my weight super high because I had that weight cap. So I was like, man, I can't go like crazy. So I was like, let me just do that, because if I go too high, then I won't be able to make my weight cap for classic. Now it's not really much of an issue. But at this point, I'm 10 weeks out and I go, I'm going to add some metabolic agents. So I added 25 micrograms of T3 and then 40 micrograms of Clen. And then I started losing decently fast. And I was like, I was like, my fat loss, like I never plateaued. I remained at like 1.5 to 2 pounds a week. When I saw it slowing down, it was perfect. When I saw it slowing down, I go, what if I had this weird idea? I've never heard anyone ever say this before either. I kind of came up with it on my own. Maybe someone has said it. I just don't know. But I was like, what if I never changed? I never lowered my food. All I did was increase cardio and increase metabolic agents. So I was like, let's try it. And then I started to notice my weight would hit a plateau. It was like 2 to 3 weeks in. I said, okay, I'm going to go up to 37.5 T3 and 80 Clen. And then it would start moving the needle again. Didn't change food at all. And I'd go, okay, 2 weeks later, let me increase my cardio. I'm going to go from 12,000 to 16,000 steps. Started moving the needle. Next thing you know, I was like, okay, hit another plateau. I'm 6 weeks out from my first show. I was like, I'm going to go to 50 T3 and 120 Clen. And then the needle started moving again. And then I wait 3 or 4 more weeks. And then I went up to, I know a lot of people won't even say real dosages, but I went up to 160 Clen and 75 T3. But I didn't change my food. So what's crazy is I never went to bed a single night hungry on prep because I never went low food. And I ended up tapering my protein up at the end because like every 2 to 3 weeks, like once I got down to my base calories at about 8 weeks out, I stopped changing my food. I had tapered my protein up to 400 grams a day from 300. I am a huge believer now in a higher protein diet. I don't like the 1 gram per pound of body weight. Fuck that shit. I don't think it's worth it. So I ended up my macros from like weeks 10 to when I got on stage never changed. 400 protein, 225 grams of carbs, and 40 grams of fat.
That's wild.
All I did was just increase metabolic. I was like, let me just see if it works. It worked like a charm. Honestly, I'd probably do it again.
Yeah, I've heard of other people doing that before. You know, I'll taper up like my contest cycles. I'll do the same thing. I taper up as I go. I actually, you know, usually I'll be ready. Justin's a wizard with the diet, but like he'll pull you down and have you ready early, and then he starts pushing food back up going into the show. But
you're changing food at some point. I literally didn't change food for 10 weeks straight.
That's wild, man.
I was like, this is so neat.
I mean, it makes sense when you think about it.
Well, it's like if you have a bank account, you know, it's like if you make the same exact $10,000 per month and just say you always spend $8,000 per month, you're always going to have a net positive cash flow of $2,000. It's like, okay, well, spend $1,000 less per month. Well, now you have a net cash flow of $3,000. I was like, the numbers make sense. Will my body do it? And it did. It was funny is everyone freaks out about the Clen. People, I think there's like a new thing like gear shaming or something. Because I remember getting a screenshot, one of Matt Jensen's people. I don't know if I should say that. But it was a girl, and she was taking 125 micrograms of T3 a day. And I'm like, if she can take that much, she was like small. She was like 140 pounds max. And I was like, if you can take 125, why can't I take 75?
There's some studies out there on T3 where people have taken like crazy doses, like 200 micrograms. I've seen. I can't remember the study. I'll have to see if I can find it and send it to you. But it was and they fully recovered their thyroid afterwards.
There's like 10-year study on those that it's because my thyroid always comes back perfect, like a week after stopping. And the Clen thing, everyone goes, "Oh my God, were you freaking out on all that Clen?" It was just funny. It was like when I went from 0 to 40 micrograms a day, I was like, for like 3 days, I was pretty wired up. And what's weird is when you think about clenbuterol, that's an everyday medication for people that have asthma. You don't see them running around like crackheads every single day of their life. So they build an immunity to it, almost like a tolerance. So I would run the 40 micrograms a day for 3 weeks straight. And I'd be like, I don't even feel it now at this point. No. Then I'd go up to 80. So I'm like, I'm doubling the dose. Kind of cracky for 2 days, then back to normal. I was like, okay. So then 3 weeks later, you know, it's like this whole 10-week thing was happening. Granted, I did 3 shows in 12 days too. So when I say 10 weeks, that's like 10 weeks from the first show, and then there's 2 more after that. So then I would go from 40 micrograms to 80, and I'd wait 3 weeks. I'm like, I don't even feel anything now. I feel great. So I go from 80 to 120. Well, that's only a 33% increase. So I only felt it for like 1 day because it wasn't that much of a jump. And then I went from 120 to 160, didn't even feel it. Because like I think like testosterone, for instance, if you had someone taking 100 milligrams of testosterone a day and you took them up 100 milligrams to 200, you would double their dosage. You would feel it. If you have someone taking 2,000 milligrams of testosterone a day and you raised it to 2,100, and let's say you didn't even tell them, they would have no idea it happened because it's such a minute. Yeah,
it's a percentage. Yep.
So that's how I figured out how to use Clen properly. I'm like, this is the easiest, best way for sure, at least for me, because a lot of people like, oh, they taper it up and they stop for a few days and they get back on, they get the side effects again. I'm like, getting side effects doesn't working.
That never made sense to me, the coming off the clenbuterol thing. Like, what drug do you do that with ever?
I don't even know. Like that, it's not like clenbuterol isn't just used for like acute purposes. And I was like, it makes zero sense to me. So
no, it's therapeutic. It's a therapeutic treatment for asthma.
Right. I'm like,
and I think in the therapeutic setting, it's up to 100 micrograms a day that they use. I believe, if I recall correct, I could be wrong about that, but that's what I'm recalling. So, like, I'll slowly taper it up. I do the same thing. I've run up to 200 before. I don't need that. Usually now I cap out around 80 or 100, and that's plenty to get the weight off of me. Yeah. And I've run up to 100 micrograms of T3 before.
That is like, yeah, I remember you mentioning, you're like, oh God, that was way too much.
It was too much for me.
Yeah. It's weird. I've seen some people that don't need more than like 30. I think like if you're someone that can diet on really low calories really good, then you probably don't need that much. But me, I was like, I'm going to try and get 4% body fat and eat, you know, my 2,800 calories a day. I can afford to take a little more. Like I'm eating more food, so I would use more thermogenics. Or I have some of my friends that can eat like guy friends, like I can eat 1,600 calories a day, no problem. I'm like, how do you do that? And they don't need many fat burners.
I eat 1,600 for breakfast.
Yeah, I was like, you probably don't need a lot of fat burners because you're not eating very much. So I was like, I think it kind of just depends on your plan. Do you want to go in? Do you want to eat more and use more fat burners, or do you want to starve and use less fat burners? It's totally up to you. Take whatever approach works for you. Because I
remember last year, I think I didn't use any T3 last year. And I think I capped out at 80 micrograms of Clen. And I also used some ephedrine, 50 milligrams of ephedrine a day.
Definitely a great appetite suppressant. I never used it.
Yeah, and that was plenty. And I was still eating plenty of food at the end. I didn't need anything else other than that. Did you run Tren at all or no?
Okay, so I was just about to bring that up. And I remember last year, I think I DM'd you. And you were like, okay, I'm going to try the thing where I do 50 milligrams like 3 times a week or every other day. And I was like, hey, if it worked for Paul, it's going to work for me. It did not work for me. First week, I ran 150 a week. Felt great, strong. I remember being on like a back machine. I'm like, man, I just hit a PR. That's weird. Like 4 weeks out. By week 2 of just running 150, I was like, man, I'm kind of irritated. I'm sleeping. It's getting worse. By the time I got to week 3, felt like dog shit. Week 4, felt even worse. Competed, never used it since. I was like, this did not work. So I was like, this prep, 0 Tren. I hate it. I mean, I love what I do. I absolutely hate it. Sorry, my dog just came in. But I absolutely, like, I will never use it again. And I was like, then I was like, what if I used it in a different context? Like, could I use it in off-season a little bit when I'm not as tired and hungry? And I never used Halo, which everyone loves. What's weird is 6 weeks out of this prep, all I used was pre-workout. I would do 25 milligrams of Anabar pre-workout. And it was actually prescription, so it was pretty stout. And then 4 weeks out, I added 50 milligrams of oral Winstrol in the morning. And that's the only orals I used. And I was like, will this work? Will this not? I was like, it's not that much, and it's not, but it's enough to get the job done, I feel like.
Yeah.
And the Tren, if it was ruining my sleep, if I'm not sleeping, am I going to recover? Am I going to have as much fat loss? Probably not. Like if someone's like, you want 150 milligrams of Tren a week, or would I take an extra 15 hours of sleep? I'm going to take that sleep all day.
Yeah, that's the trade-off with Tren. I have a love-hate relationship with it, man. I've almost thought about not even trying to use it on prep. I'm the same way. Like I ran 20 milligrams a day last year for the last 6 weeks. And that was kind of the top end of where I feel like I can tolerate, but it still affected my sleep some at the end, even at 20 milligrams a day. People laugh, like people think I'm lying when I say I only ran 20 milligrams a day. I'm like, I hate Tren. I don't know why people like it so much.
Yeah, but you always feel like there's someone that's going to take Tren and beat you. And you're like, you don't want to do your prep and be like, oh man, if I would have taken Tren.
I will say this, my body just responds to it, dude. I'm telling you, like within 2 weeks of taking it, I look like a Texas road map, man. I just like my veins everywhere. It transforms my body composition. I don't know why.
Speaking of which, do you ever think like, everyone goes like, oh, Tren's the magic drug and stuff at the end. I was like, don't you ever think like when I'm doing my contest preps, I start to look really good around like 4 weeks out, which is 4 to 6 weeks out, which is ironically the same time everyone adds in Tren. So I was like, yeah, I'm just going to try it. Let me see if I can. And ironically, this is the time I go pro is when I don't use Tren. And I was like, let me see if it really makes that much of a difference. And what's funny is like, cause I got to work, I got to see patients all day. I can't be like an asshole to them. And, you know, like girlfriend and dog and all that stuff. I was like, let me see if I was like, maybe I'll just use more Masteron and I may look the same in the end. Honestly, I look better. So I was like, is the 150 or 140 milligrams of Tren a week worth it? Like to me, it definitely wasn't. Cause like I did look better when I took it in the past, but I felt like absolute horseshit. Yeah. So I was like, I'd rather just take more Masteron or testosterone or something.
Yeah, I know. Like the old school, like the late '90s, early 2000s prep cycles was test Masteron and Winstrol, and that's all dudes did.
Yeah, but you feel like you're missing out if you don't take Tren, and I was like the same way. And I'm like, well, I guess if I lose this, at least I'm going to lose it with my own opinion, you know, because everyone's like, oh man, I feel great when I take 300 or 500 milligrams of Tren. I'm like, if you feel great with that, what are you taking really? Like, you can't. I don't
know. I don't know how anybody can feel great on it.
I was like, I respond great. I'm like, and they're like halftime, not even good bodybuilders. I'm like, do you though? Like, I don't understand.
I remember the first time I took it, man, this is a long time ago, 2004, we made our own out of the Phenoplex tablets. I don't know how much I took. It had to have been like 700-800 milligrams. I have no idea, but it was a crazy dose. I remember I got an insane fever, like I had the flu, like 102, 101, 102. I guess I had some sort of immune response, I guess, to the prostaglandins. Yeah. And it was like I thought I was going to die. It was awful.
At this point, I'm like jealous of the people that can tolerate it so well. I'm like, good for you. Use it. You're lucky. But then I was thinking myself, I'm like, okay, how about maybe since I'm not using Tren, maybe I'll just do a little extra cardio, or I'll be extra specific on my food to make up the difference. Because I'm like, yes, Tren works, but I'm also like, I'd rather you be 100% on your diet and not take Tren than be 90% on. And it's like sometimes if you take that, you feel like you can get away with a little more. So I was like, this time I was like, I just want to be 100% on my food. Not miss any workouts, try to give good technique. I was like, I don't think the Tren's even going to make a 1% difference with me. So I was I'm not even going to use it. And
I mean, well, you look great. So the results speak for themselves.
Best I ever looked in my life. And this was the first time, I think my heart rate never got above like 67. Never had blood pressure issues. I would get, at the end of prep, I was still getting like 5.5, 6 hours of sleep, which for me is pretty good. If I was like working full time. Yeah. When I do Tren, it would be like 4 hours. So basically, like once I got to the 8-week mark, I would slowly taper up my metabolic agents, my T3 and Clen. And then what I did was I want to say it was like 8 weeks out, I switched. I didn't really know my thought process behind this, but I was like, I'm going to switch my Primobolan for Masteron. I'm just going to switch it. I remember the Primo, I was like, man, that stuff, the 200 milligrams per milliliter was giving me a little bit of pip. So I was like, let me just switch it for the sake of switching. I don't know the science behind, because I remember a lot of people like, oh, you got to switch your compounds every once in a while. I'm like, do you though? I'm like, you don't do that with testosterone. And
I run the same shit year round.
Yeah. So I'm like, I don't really do that, but I'm going to switch to Masteron just to see if the pip would be a little bit less. And it worked. And I still had the same visual effect. So I was like, why not? Yep. And then I just switched it for basically I would do, instead of doing 3 pins per week at 250 test, 200 Primo, I would just do every other day, 250 test, 200 mast. So it came out to 875 tests, 700 Masteron. So I was like, I'm going a little heavier on the oils, but I'm not having to leverage a ton of orals. Because sometimes like Winstrol would give you like heartburn and stuff.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'll just use that for the very end. I did that for a total of 4 weeks. And the Anavar was 6 weeks total. But I really just ran the long ester test in Masteron from a week out from the first show. And then I competed in summer shredding, which was an awesome show. Christian Guzman held. That week, I kept everything the same. The following week, I did the Dexter Jackson Classic in Florida. That was my qualifier for the USA Championships. And then all I did was switch my test to 250 milligrams per week. And then I upped the Masteron to 1,000. Because I was like, I feel like I was a tad, I'm not going to say it was all estrogen, but I feel like I was a little too full for the summer shredding show. And then I added in 2 Aromasin per week. And then I was, I feel like I looked a little bit better for the Dexter Jackson one. And I dieted a little harder, lost 3 more pounds. Some of that was obviously water from the estrogen. I was like, oh, this looks a lot better. So then for USA Championships, I just stayed on 250 test and 1,000 Masteron. And that's all I did. And the growth hormone, about 6 weeks out from the first show, I upped it to 4 IUs in the morning, 4 IUs at night, because I was more insulin sensitive. And I dropped that a week out from the first show. And that was actually it. So like full blast, it was like my highest was 875 test, 700 mast, 25 Anabar pre-workout, 50 Winstrol, 75 T3, 160 Clen.
That's perfect.
Growth hormone.
That's pretty similar to how I do contest prep cycles. It's pretty much the same, except minus the Tren. I always sprinkle a little Tren in there. Roman Fritz, you know him, IFBB Pro. I was talking to him. He said he doesn't take orals on prep at all.
No kidding.
Yeah, he said he doesn't use any. He has stomach ulcers and stuff, so he said he's had to stop using them, so he doesn't use them at all. Did he get the stomach ulcers from orals?
Yeah. Most likely.
Yeah, probably.
I was wondering, because when I'm trying to think with the orals, like, I think worst case scenario, you could always use maybe a little bit of Anavar if you wanted to play super safe. But
yeah,
I was even debating using the Winstrol, because I was like, man, are my HDL?
I don't use Winstrol.
And I was like, in the heartburn, I'm like, I bet you. What's funny is the overseas guys that I talk to, coaches and athletes there, they don't really use Winstrol that much. They're big Anavar fans. Like, it does the same thing. Don't worry about it. And
I run Anavar. I don't use Winstrol.
Right. But then, you know how I was mentioning the Tren thing where it's like, oh man, I'm going to miss out. I was like, I can't miss out on both. So I got scared at the last minute and I used the Winstrol. Did it make a difference? Probably not. Would I do it again? I don't think it made that much of a difference. I could do the whole prep with Test, Masteron, and or Primo, and Anavar, and I guarantee you I could do just as well as I did before.
Probably.
Because I don't think there's any magic in all the other stuff. The EQ thing, I got off that train a long time ago with blood pressure problems and hematocrit. I was like, no thanks, not doing it.
Yeah, EQ scares me at the end of prep too, because with the issues with erythrocytosis, it's the worst for increasing red blood cell count. And if guys are like throwing diuretics in and already dehydrated and stuff, and then it just seems like a recipe for throwing a clot and having a fucking cardiovascular event.
I feel horrible, but I can't remember the guy's name. He was a 212 competitor, died like 3 years ago. Black guy.
Black guy. I can't remember.
Classic.
Yeah.
Amazing. And he died 2 days before Olympia. Ironically, the only thing he tested positive for was Baltimore.
Was EQ.
I'm like, man, I wonder how much that had to play. And I remember what's scary was I remember I would like turn my phone to my girlfriend. I'm like, dude, I remember saying like, it it was a picture of him like a couple days out, and his eyes were so sunken. I was like, dude, I feel like he's gonna die. And he died the next day later. I'm like, I felt guilty. I was like, did I call this? I was like, because he looked so sunken in and depleted. I was like, oh my God, I like felt terrible, you know.
I remember reading his autopsy report, and he basically his autopsy was clean. They said that he died from an acute hypertensive event.
Yeah.
So,
and I feel like a lot of people, what's funny is the old school coaches are like, nope, test EQ MPP is the best. But I'm like, I feel like there's a million other things you could use to do the job of what you want EQ to do. I never loved it. Not a huge fan. I feel like Nandrolone, I haven't used a lot of it in the past. I feel like I would think when I was younger and more immature, I didn't like losing the visual part.
Yeah.
And I felt like those 19 Nors always
they do make you pop.
Yeah. And I remember because when I was younger, I was like on the Tren train. And I'm like, I'm going to do this. I don't care about the side effects. And I was like, I'm going to run 500 tests and 500 Tren. And I would feel like crap. I was like in college. Yep. And I was like, everyone else is doing it. I'm going to do it. And then once I got older, I was like, no, I went from being like the guy that would use like 500 milligrams a week and just power through and like sweat my ass off all night and feel like shit because I thought it'd make me a better bodybuilder. And it in fact made me worse. So I went from like using what I would say is a lot of it to medium to nothing. So
I'll tell you what, I just run Test and Primo year round and GH. That's it, man.
Yeah. I think I think good Primo is probably better than Masteron in most cases. If you don't have access to it, just use Masteron, close enough.
Yeah, I mean, Masteron is poor man's Primo, that's what I call it, but it's a bit more androgenic, less anabolic, but they're very similar, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I could literally make an entire off season with just Test and Primo. I don't even need an AI when I use that. Like, it's so phenomenal.
No, I don't. I just played around with pushing up just for the fuck of it this year. I usually 1.3 grams is the max I go up to in the off season, but I pushed my test up to 1,500 and my Primo up to 1,000 just to see. And my estradiol was in the 50s.
But did you have any other negative side effects? Because I think I'm not seeing a lot of people get major side effects running even a lot of Test and Primo. I'm just not.
No, I felt okay. Other than I got a little bit of like I think I get a little bit of the test flu.
Food you're cramming all the time too. What if you could just maintenance calories and do it? You know?
Yeah. I mean, that may have been why I lost weight too. It might not have been the HGH, you know. So that may have been it. I just turned into a furnace at that point. But yeah, I backed it back down. So like I finished up my off season so I always taper up. I start off low. Like I just basically come out of TRT and just add like 100 milligrams of this every week and then just keep tapering up. Yeah. But I think I finished up at 1,000 tests and 800 Primos where I finished up the off season.
Yeah, what's kind of neat too is the tapering up method. This offseason, I was kind of thinking what I'm going to do because they're like, oh, you're going to compete? Well, I got to gain all this weight because now I'm in a new weight cap. I actually thought about just doing a super simple offseason. Even like per month, I was going to say, hey, well, I'm on I guess my rebound is 500 tests per week. What if I did that for August? In September, went up to 750. And then went up to 1,000 the following month and 1,250 the following month, and just try to focus on, like, you still have the anabolics in there, but really just try to nail the food and training and just slowly grow.
Yep.
Like, is it worth, like, could I say like, oh yeah, I'll just use Aromasin if needed, or should I add a Masteron or Primo? I for some reason, I just wanted to try test only just to see how it worked. And maybe in summertime I would do something different, but I love the idea of just trying to nail food and training and just slowly taper up the gear so you're not like totally relying on it.
Yep.
And just try to stay as healthy as possible, keep some cardio in, and just slowly taper up the anabolics over a longer period of time. I was like, maybe I should use, because now you guys have me motivated to try some GH in the off season, which I've never done. But yeah, I was thinking about this wintertime, just doing test only and then giving that a full, like a real shot, and then trying test and Primobolan and comparing the two. Obviously, estrogen will be a little harder to modulate without the Primobolan.
Yeah, that's the issue I've run into. I feel like the Primobolan makes the test work better.
Yeah.
It's sort of testosterone's best friend.
Yeah.
I've tried test by itself before, and I just get I like I hit about 500 milligrams, and then my 500 750 somewhere around there, and then my estrogen just starts getting really out of whack, man, and I need an AI, and my blood pressure starts getting high.
Let
But
me
I
ask,
didn't have all those issues when I was running Primo with it.
right. So let me ask you this: when people say, "Oh man, AIs are so bad for you," is it that AIs are bad for you, or is it that having low estrogen?
With low estrogen's bad for you.
I'm like, if you're taking 1,500 milligrams of testosterone, say, and you have to use 2-Aromasin to keep your estradiol at, say, 50, is the AI a problem?
No, I don't think so.
Right. So I'm kind of thinking like, if your reason for using Primobolan is to manage your estrogen, and that's why you had bad problems with tests, I'm like, well, why didn't you just use, say, 2-Aromasin or something like that? Like, would it be the same, or is it that Primobolan not only manages the estrogen, but the anabolic effect is so much more efficient?
Yeah, it's the anabolic effect, and it also is going to lower SHBG, which is going to cause you to have more free testosterone.
It's double whammy.
Yeah, so you get the double whammy there. So you're modulating estrogen, freeing up more testosterone, and you get the anabolic effect from the Primo, and there's not much of an androgenic effect as well. So that's sort of my logic.
Yeah. So speaking of the numbers, what's your favorite ratio? Would you say, hey, I'm going to run a 2-to-1 ratio between test to Primobolan? Does it need to be a 1-to-1 ratio? Somewhere in between?
It's like about 80%, I would say, is where I found works well for me.
So a 1-to-1 ratio, basically.
Yeah. So I mean, but so it's you do the math on it. Most UGL test is 250, and then it's either Primo's going to be 100 or 200. So it's for me, it's just one cc of both, right?
That's what I would do too, because you'd run 250 test, 200 Primo.
Yep.
And you'd say, I'll do 3 cc's of each a week or something like that. And
yep.
750, 600, perfect ratio, or 1,800, something like that.
Yep. That's exactly what I do.
That makes sense. I just don't know the ratio. Like, can you get away with a little bit of Primo? How much do you need?
You probably could get away with less.
But I mean, then you might have to bring in AI, and then you kind of like, you want to.
Yeah. I mean, I found when I run it at that ratio, when I get my blood work done, that my estradiol stays in the high 50s, low 60s, which is perfect for the off season, I think.
Oh, funny. Speaking of which, I thought that, I'll tell you one thing that did not work that I experimented with last year. It was kind of funny. I said, oh, I'm kind of lean after a contest. I'm going to do test and MENT. But because it was test, Primobolan, and a little bit of MENT, I said the Primobolan will stop the conversion. Well, let me tell you, when you throw MENT in the mix, it was not enough. And I gained like 6 pounds in 2 weeks, and then I got gyno. So I was like, that was great. So I had to come off everything. And I did 2 weeks of 1,000 milligrams of Masteron a week. So I just stopped the test, stopped everything. I switched to Masteron for the serum effect, and then I used Nolvadex every day. Within 10 days, actually, the lump was totally gone. Thank God, it just swelled up. I was like, I don't think I like MENT anymore. I obviously didn't use it right at that time, but I just couldn't believe how quickly that gyno blew up. Like, if you're going to use MENT, you better have an AI on fucking hand.
Yeah, it's going to upregulate the aromatase expression and cause way more of that the testosterone to convert to estrogen. That's why I tell people don't fuck with it. Some people, I guess if you've had gyno surgery and you're clean, I mean, you want to blow up and put on a bunch of weight quickly, it could be used. But I don't know anymore. I just kind of any synthetic progestin, any of the 19 Nors, I don't know. I feel like a lot of the nastier side effects that we get are from those. I'm just anymore. For me, it's just test and a DHT derivative. I think primarily for my base compounds.
Yeah, that's where I'm at now too. Because I said, okay, if you're going to run MENT, maybe you should run like an HRT test, run a little bit of MENT, and then you're going to have to run like 400 or 500 Primo with it too. Like whatever.
But at that point, is it even worth it?
Right. So then I go, well, why not? I was like, that seems like a lot of work for that month. So I was kind of like, if I can get a pro card running no Tren, DHTs, Halo, stuff like that, but Tornpec, all these things, I really do think just pairing it with test and one DHT is the way to go. And if you're doing prep, you can pair it with 2 or 3. You could use Anavar with it, or you could use Test, Masteron, and Primo if you want. Like, go ahead. But off season, it just seems. I mean, I'm going to find out soon with the whole test deal. Is it hard to manage my estradiol? If so, I'm just going to add Primobolan in.
Well, if you're going to push your estradiol through the roof, you might as well throw some HGH and insulin in there so you get the IGF-1 production from it.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to go do my labs quite consistently to see. Like, I might even have a rule of thumb saying, like, for every 500 milligrams of test I'll use, I'm going to add in 25 milligrams of Aromasin, just as a rule of thumb, just to kind of be proactive with it. And see, like, I'm trying to figure out the ratio with that too. Is it for every, 500 milligrams, do you add 1 Aromasin? Will it be 375, 250? Nobody knows. You have to go check for yourself.
It just depends, man. Aromatization really varies wildly from person to person. Your body fat percentage plays a role into it. There's so many variables.
Yeah. Speaking of which, too, if I'm super lean now, I might be able to get away with a little more.
Yeah, you might not need one.
In 4 months, this might be a different story.
Yeah,
when 250 pounds,
Might not need one. All right, Mike, I got to wrap this up, sir. I appreciate you coming on. Folks, Mike, if people want to get a hold of you, how can they get a hold of you?
You can just look me up on Instagram at Mike Blackbeard. I know I'm like Black Stash right now, but normally just Mike Blackbeard. Feel free to DM or ask questions and stuff. And I'm pretty active on my stories. And unfortunately, I don't have a YouTube channel, so I rely on people with one to talk to me. So.
Well, we'll have you back on again, man. And I'll put your contact information in the video description below. And thank you for watching, folks. For coaching or consultations, head over to www.anabolicbodybuilding.com to book your spot today. I can help you with optimizing hormones, fat loss, muscle gain, physique, athletic performance, nutrition, and health. For more information, shoot me an email at bigp3rd@gmail.com.